The Galactic Survival Institute had, over the course of approximately 14,000 standard cycles, perfected the art of making species suffer for educational purposes. They called it character building. Most participants called it other things, usually while sobbing into whatever appendages they possessed for sobbing purposes. The Institute's trials came in various flavors of misery, each designed to test a species' worthiness for integration into the broader cosmic community. There was the Frozen Wasteland trial, the Aquatic Nightmare trial, the Zero-Gravity Psychological Breakdown trial, and the personal favorite of sadistic administrators everywhere, the Timber-Only Survival trial. This particular examination restricted contestants to wooden materials exclusively, a limitation that transformed basic survival into an exercise in creative desperation. No metals, no synthetics, no crystalline energy matrices, nothing but what could be carved, bent, or otherwise coerced from trees and plants. Previous species had approached this trial with the grim determination of the doomed. The Krillex, with their 17 manipulation tentacles and 3 cognitive brain clusters, had lasted 42 hours before their shelter collapsed and knocked their primary consciousness unit into temporary hibernation. The Venturi collective, a hive mind species considered among the most resourceful in known space, had managed a respectable 16 days before their wooden water collection system failed, and the whole colony entered emergency stasis. The record stood at 23 days, held by the Thexnari, a species whose entire evolutionary history involved living in wooden structures, and even they had barely limped across the finish line. The trial took place on Verdania 7, a planet whose primary evolutionary achievement was producing trees. So many trees. Trees that grew taller than most species' spacecraft, trees that twisted into impossible geometries, trees with wood harder than standard combat plating, trees that shed bark like some kind of arboreal molting ritual. If the universe had wanted to create a planet-sized advertisement for the timber industry, it had succeeded spectacularly. Observation of the trials had become something of a galactic pastime. Betting pools sprawled across multiple star systems, commentary channels broadcast in 4,000 languages. Entire academic careers were built on analyzing survival strategies and publishing papers with titles like Resource Optimization in Restricted Material Environments, a comprehensive failure analysis. When the human entry was announced, the collective response ranged from mild curiosity to outright laughter. Humans were newcomers, barely 3 generations into galactic society, still figuring out which customs were universal and which were species-specific. They had a reputation for being unusually durable and irritatingly stubborn, but hardly anyone expected competence in a trial that had humbled civilizations with 10,000 years of spacefaring experience. The human contestant arrived via standard transport, carrying nothing but the regulation survival jumpsuit and an expression of profound calm that the receiving administrators found vaguely insulting. His name was Dominic Reeves, and according to his file, he worked as something called a living history interpreter on Earth, which apparently involved pretending to be from earlier technological eras for the entertainment and education of others. The administrators filed this under quaint primitive hobbies and moved on. Dominic stood roughly 1.8 meters tall, with brown hair going gray at the temples and hands that looked like they had spent considerable time doing actual physical labor, a sight unusual enough that some aliens took photographs. He smiled at the orientation briefing, nodded during the rules explanation, and actually chuckled when they emphasized the timber-only restriction. Kixil, the Tritaxian overseer assigned to this trial, found the chuckle disturbing. In 14 trials under Kixil's supervision, Exactly 0 contestants had expressed amusement. Terror, resignation, determination, despair, yes. Amusement, no. You understand the parameters. Kixill's translator rendered the question in flat Earth standard English. Would only 30 days, 100 square kilometers survive, Dominic recited. Yeah. Got it. Sounds like a decent camping trip. Camping. The translator had to pass that twice. Voluntary wilderness habitation for recreational purposes. Kixill added a note to the file about possible human cognitive deficiencies. The betting pools opened at 5,000 to 1 against the human lasting 2 weeks. By the time Dominic was transported to his starting coordinates, those odds had dropped to 3,000 to 1, purely because someone had circulated video of him examining the equipment staging area and laughing with what could only be described as anticipatory glee. The trial began at local dawn, which on Verdania 7 meant the smaller sun crested the horizon, while the larger one was still deciding whether to bother. Dominic materialized in a clearing surrounded by the standard variety pack of trees, hardwoods, softwoods, woods that probably had technical names that Dominic would absolutely ignore, in favor of calling them the bendy ones and the ones that smell weird. Overhead, observation drones hummed. In orbital stations, commentators settled in for what they expected would be a brief and educational demonstration of human inadequacy. 3 Nox, a Velkir with iridescent scales and 3 parallel larynxes that made his voice sound like a musical chord, handled the play-by-play. And we're underway, folks. The human appears to be walking in a circle, examining trees. This is standard survey behavior, nothing unusual yet. His co-commentator, Vexi Mara, a Silthan whose crystalline body refracted light in unsettling patterns, chimed in with analysis. Statistically speaking, 3 Nox, the first shelter construction should begin within the first 2 hours. Hydration location within the first hour. Instead, he's touching bark. He's smelling bark. Is this normal human behavior? According to their cultural database, humans have something called stopping to smell the roses, so perhaps this is related. Though these are clearly not roses. Dominic, blissfully unaware that his botanical survey was being analyzed by millions of viewers, continued his assessment. He wasn't just looking at trees, he was reading them like a favorite book, cataloging properties with the ease of long practice. That white-barked beauty had tight grain, perfect for carving. The darker specimens with the rough bark would provide excellent structural strength. Those willowy things near the stream, their wood would bend without breaking, ideal for specific applications he was already planning. 3 hours in, he selected a straight hardwood sapling, approximately 3 meters tall and 4 centimeters in diameter. Using a sharp-edged stone he'd found and quickly worked into a crude blade, he began the methodical process of harvesting it. Finally, shelter construction, 3 Nox announced with relief. Although that's quite thin for structural support. Dominic wasn't building a shelter. He was building a bow. The process took 6 hours of careful work. Shaping the stave, creating the gentle curve that would store and release energy. Fashioning a bowstring from plant fibers he'd gathered, while everyone thought he was just wandering aimlessly. Crafting arrows from straight shoots, with fire-hardened points and fletching from bird feathers he'd collected near the stream. When he finally strung the bow and drew it experimentally, the cameras caught every moment. The smooth pull, the perfect arc, the satisfied nod as he checked the alignment. "That's a weapon," Vexi Mara stated, as if announcing a profound discovery. "He's made a projectile weapon." Well, yes, many species create hunting implements, though usually after securing shelter and water. The commentary cut off as Dominic knocked an arrow, drew and released in one fluid motion. 40 meters away, a tree-dwelling creature similar to Earth's rabbits dropped from a branch, arrow through its vitals, dead before it hit the ground. The silence in the commentary booth lasted approximately 4 seconds. Did he? He did. But he didn't even... I know. The calculation time alone should have, I know. While aliens processed what they'd witnessed, Dominic was already field-dressing his kill with practiced efficiency. Fire came next, started with a bow drill that he assembled in minutes, and operated with the bored competence of someone who'd done this roughly 10,000 times. Meat roasted while he finally, 8 hours into the trial, began work on an actual shelter. The structure he built wasn't elaborate. A simple lean-to framework of sturdy branches, thatched with broad leaves and bark strips, positioned with its back to the prevailing wind and its opening toward the fire. Functional, efficient and completed in less than 2 hours. By nightfall of day 1, Dominic Reeves had shelter, fire, cooked food, a reliable hunting weapon, and was whittling another set of arrows by firelight while humming something that the audio analysis computers identified as a sea shanty from Earth's 18th century. The betting pools went into freefall. Day 2 began with Dominic eating leftover roasted meat and conducting another survey, this time with more specific intent. He selected a location approximately 200 meters from his shelter, where game trails converged near a fruiting bush. What he built there looked, to untrained observers, like random sticks arranged in a suspicious pile. It was a deadfall trap, weighted with a carefully balanced log that would drop when the trigger mechanism was disturbed. Simple physics, lethal efficiency. He built another one a quarter-kilometer away, this time a snare design that would catch and hold rather than kill. Then a tension trap that used a bent sapling as a spring. Then something the observers couldn't quite categorize, but which involved sharp sticks at creative angles and a triggering mechanism of disturbing sophistication. He's setting traps, Thrinox observed, somewhat unnecessarily. Multiple traps, Veximara corrected, in a distributed network pattern, with different designs for different prey types and different kill or capture objectives. Is this normal? For a survival situation? Perhaps 1 trap, maybe 2. This is 7 now. No, 8. He's building another one. By day 3, Dominic had established 17 traps across a 3-kilometer radius, each one marked in his mental map, with the casual precision of someone who understood that forgetting where you put sharp spring-loaded death was a quick route to becoming your own victim. He checked them at dawn and dusk, a routine that took less than an hour thanks to the efficient patrol route he'd established. The aliens watched with growing unease as the human implemented what military analysts were now calling distributed autonomous hunting systems. Dominic called it not having to work too hard for dinner. 3 of the traps produced on day 4, 2 more on day 5. Suddenly, the human had more food than he could immediately consume, which led to the construction of a smoking rack for preservation and a raised cache for storage. Problems solved before they became problems, with the infuriating ease of someone working from experience rather than theory. Week 1 concluded with Dominic expanding his infrastructure in ways that made the observers progressively more disturbed. His original shelter remained his primary residence, but he'd constructed 3 additional structures, each with specific purposes. One served as a workshop, where he carved and assembled tools with the methodical patience of a craftsman. Bone needles, wooden wedges, cordage of various thicknesses, all organized and stored with military precision. Another structure functioned as a smokehouse, preserving meat in quantities that suggested planning for a siege rather than a 30-day trial. The third was a covered storage area for wood stock, sorted by type and intended purpose. Connecting these structures were paths, cleared and maintained, that allowed efficient movement between locations. Beside the stream, he'd built a water collection system using hollowed logs as channels, directing flow into a settling pool where sediment could drop out before the water continued into carved wooden containers for storage. "He's built a village," Kixil reported to the trial administrators, disbelief evident even through the translator's flat processing. "One human, 7 days, and he's built a village." The administrators checked the regulations. Nothing explicitly prohibited village construction. The rules stated survival for 30 days using only timber-derived materials. Technically, the human was complying perfectly. Technically, they were watching something that shouldn't be possible. Week 2 began with Dominic implementing improvements that suggested he'd merely been establishing basics during Week 1 and was now moving into what he apparently considered actual comfort. His main shelter gained a raised bed platform, insulated with dried grasses and furs from his trap catches. The workshop expanded with the addition of a proper workbench, complete with wooden vises for holding pieces during detailed carving. He constructed a bathhouse near the stream, with heated rocks providing steam and carved channels managing water flow. The trap network expanded to 24 installations, arranged in what military strategists recognized as overlapping coverage zones with redundant systems. If one area underperformed, others compensated. The whole system required approximately 90 minutes daily to check and maintain, leaving Dominic with vast stretches of time for other projects. Those other projects included an experimental garden plot where he'd transplanted edible plants from the surrounding forest, creating a concentrated food source that required minimal travel. A fish trap in the stream, operating continuously. An expanded food preservation system with multiple smoking racks and a root cellar dug into a hillside and lined with bark. "He's not surviving," Veximara stated during the Day 12 commentary session. "Survival implies difficulty, struggle, desperation. He's thriving. He's doing better than I do in my climate-controlled habitat pod." Threnox played back footage of Dominic from that morning, sitting on his porch. Yes, the man had built a porch, eating smoked fish and fresh berries while watching the sunrise. The betting pools have completely inverted. People are now wagering on how elaborate the infrastructure will get. Current favorite is aqueduct system. Second place is multi-story construction. By day 15, Dominic had established what could only be described as a homestead. His shelter network had grown to 7 buildings, including a dedicated storage facility for tools, a separate structure for food processing, and what appeared to be a recreational area with carved wooden furniture. The paths between structures had evolved into proper trails, cleared, leveled, and marked with carved signposts that the translation computers identified as jokes. Downtown pointed toward the workshop cluster. Scenic route indicated the longer path to the stream with better views. Trap line Alpha marked the northern patrol route with a small addendum that translated roughly to "watch your step." His daily routine had stabilized into something that looked suspiciously like leisure. Wake at dawn, check the traps along the morning route, return with whatever they'd caught, process any food that needed processing, spend midday on improvement projects or simple maintenance, check the evening trap route, prepare dinner, spend the remaining daylight on personal projects. Those personal projects were where things got really insulting to everyone who'd struggled through this trial. Dominic had begun carving. Decorative carving. He made wooden bowls with intricate patterns. He crafted a chair with a curved back that looked genuinely comfortable. He whittled small animal figures during his evening downtime, creating a collection that he displayed on a shelf he'd built specifically for that purpose. "He's making art," Kixil reported. Voice hollow. "In a survival trial, he's making art." The academic community exploded into debate. Papers were published with titles like "Re-evaluating Resource Abundance Perception in Restricted Material Environments" and "The Human Approach to Survival. Why is it working?" Conferences were scheduled. Graduate students began dissertations. Week 3 opened with Dominic implementing what the observers had started calling the unnecessary improvements. His main shelter gained wooden shutters for the windows he'd installed. Shutters, with hinges made from carved wood and plant fiber rope. The workshop acquired better lighting through the strategic placement of reflective panels made from polished wood sections. He built a proper chair for his porch and spent an entire afternoon testing different positions until he found the optimal angle for relaxation. Then he made a second chair because apparently one chair was insufficient for a solo survival trial. The trap network required minimal attention now, operating with the smooth efficiency of a mature system. 3 times he'd relocated underperforming traps to better positions. Twice he'd redesigned mechanisms to better suit specific prey patterns he'd observed. The whole network produced more food than he could consume, leading to an expanded preservation operation and stockpiles that could sustain him for months beyond the trial period. His garden plot had matured into a productive supplement to his hunting. Edible plants thrived in their concentrated arrangement, providing fresh vegetables with minimal effort. He'd even begun experimental cultivation of useful fiber plants, planning ahead for cordage needs that wouldn't arrive until long after the trial ended. "I've reviewed the historical records," Knox told his audience during day 19. "No previous contestant has ever had surplus resources. The Thexnari, our record holders, ended the trial having consumed all available supplies and operating on minimal reserves. This human has enough stockpiled food to run a commercial restaurant. The regulations will change after this," Veximara predicted. "They have to. He's not exploiting loopholes. He's just demonstrating that we fundamentally misunderstood what's possible with these restrictions." Day 21 marked the final week, and Dominic celebrated by building a sauna. An actual sauna, with a fire pit for heating rocks, a contained wooden room for steam retention, and a cold plunge pool fed by stream water. He spent that evening relaxing in steam, occasionally adding water to the hot rocks, living his best life while the galactic community questioned everything they thought they knew about survival. The administrators reviewed every second of footage, searching for rule violations and finding nothing but competence. Uncomfortable, paradigm-shifting competence that made thousands of years of conventional wisdom look actively stupid. The final week became a tour of refinement. Dominic didn't build new structures, he improved existing ones, better weatherproofing on the shelters, more efficient layout in the workshop, enhanced drainage around the buildings. Small touches that transformed good construction into excellent construction. His daily routine had compressed to perhaps 4 hours of necessary work, leaving 20 hours for whatever he felt like doing. He carved more decorative items. He improved his furniture. He sat on his porch reading the wood grain patterns in the forest and planning future projects he'd never have time to implement. The trap network operated like clockwork, requiring only brief maintenance during his patrol routes. The garden produced steadily. The preservation systems kept his surplus food safe indefinitely. He'd built a self-sustaining operation that could, theoretically, support him for years rather than days. On day 28, he began the disassembly process, not because anything was failing, but because the trial was ending, and he wanted to leave the area clean. He dismantled traps, scattered his stockpiles for local wildlife, carefully deconstructed the structures that could be deconstructed. By day 30, only his original shelter remained, a courtesy to future contestants who might need emergency protection. The trial ended at local noon on day 30. Dominic stood in the clearing where he'd started, looking remarkably cleaner and healthier than when he'd arrived, holding his bow and a small bag of carved figures he'd decided to keep as souvenirs. The extraction team materialized, led by Kixil, who'd spent 30 days watching the impossible become routine. "How?" Kixil asked. "Abandoning all professional protocols. How did you do this?" Dominic shrugged. The universal human gesture for seemed obvious to me. "Primitive human camping techniques. We've been doing this version for, 40,000 years or so. You kind of get good at it." 40,000, Kixil's translator stuttered. "This is primitive." "Well, yeah, no power tools, no modern materials, just wood and stone and fiber. Basic stuff." He hefted his bow affectionately. "My ancestors would have considered this a pretty standard hunting trip, though they'd probably question the lack of beer." The debriefing took 3 hours. The judges, led by Corvush, a Ventralian with sensory clusters that processed information in 17-dimensional matrices, asked increasingly desperate questions. "The trap network distribution pattern," Corvush began. "The mathematical optimization required to game trails cross near food sources," Dominic interrupted. "Put traps where animals go. Not really math, just observation. The structural engineering of your buildings, the load calculations, wood's strong when you use it right. Triangles are sturdy. Again, pretty basic. The resource management projections that allowed you to build surplus, catch more than you eat, save the extra. Is this not? Do other species not do this?" The judges looked at each other. Several species did do this, in resource-rich environments, with technological support, after extensive planning. None did it reflexively, as a default approach, while simultaneously building infrastructure that would make urban planners weep with envy. The official report, published 3 days later, contained phrases like exceptional demonstration of resource utilization and unprecedented integration of multiple survival strategies and comprehensive systems thinking. What it meant was humans are terrifyingly competent at living in the woods, and we have no idea why. Dominic returned to Earth with a perfect score, formal commendation from the Galactic Survival Institute, and 17 interview requests from academic institutions. He declined the interviews, accepted the commendation politely, and went back to his job teaching historical living skills to children at a reconstructed frontier village. The betting pools paid out to the few wise souls who'd bet on human success, creating several new millionaires and one brief economic disruption on a mining colony that had leveraged too heavily against Dominic. The Galactic Survival Institute rewrote their trial parameters. The timber-only trial now included explicit restrictions on trap quantities, building counts, and infrastructure complexity. They called it preventing exploitation of poorly defined parameters. Everyone else called it the human rules.